They thought I was a nobody. They could control a simple signature and I'd be erased from their world. But they never expected the one thing that would turn their game into my battlefield, a $29 million secret they couldn't touch. When my fiancé's family shoved that prenup across their marble table like I was some gold-digging peasant, they had no idea they were about to learn the difference between inherited arrogance and earned power. Some lessons cost more than others. My name is Samantha Kerrigan, and I should have seen it coming the moment that invitation arrived. The envelope itself was a work of art, thick ivory cardstock with gold-embossed edges that caught the afternoon light streaming through my Denver apartment windows. Inside, elegant calligraphy announced an engagement dinner at the Prescott Estate in Sonoma Valley. The date, the time 7:30 p.m., the dress code of cocktail formal. Every detail meticulously planned, every word carefully chosen. Except for one glaring omission, my name wasn't anywhere on it. I turned the invitation over twice, checked the envelope again. The Prescott family cordially invites you to celebrate the engagement of Evan Michael Prescott. That was it. No and Samantha Kerrigan. No acknowledgement that this celebration was supposedly for both of us. Just Evan's name floating alone on that pristine cardstock like I was some unnamed +1 to my own engagement party. At 34, I'd built a career as a senior interior architect, designing spaces for clients who paid premium rates for my vision. I understood the language of presentation, the subtle ways people communicated status and worth through seemingly innocent choices. This wasn't an oversight. This was a statement. I set the invitation on my kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, where it seemed to mock me every morning for a week. Evan had mentioned the dinner in passing. Mom wants to do something formal to celebrate, but he'd never shown me the invitation. Never asked for my input on the guest list or the menu or any of the details. His mother, Margot Prescott, had undoubtedly orchestrated with military precision. The Prescott family owned one of California's most prestigious wineries, a multi-generational empire built on rolling Sonoma Valley hills and carefully cultivated connections. Evan was the heir apparent, charming and handsome in that effortless way that money tends to polish. When we'd met 18 months ago at a design conference in San Francisco, he'd seemed genuinely interested in my work, my thoughts, my life beyond what I could offer his family name. But Margot had made her position clear from our first meeting. The questions had come wrapped in maternal concern. Where exactly had I grown up? What did my parents do? How interesting that I'd worked my way through college. Each inquiry delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, followed by those assessing glances that cataloged everything from my handbag to my accent, filing away evidence of my middle-class origins. I'd dismissed it as typical future mother-in-law territory, the natural protective instinct of a woman guarding her son's inheritance. But this invitation felt different. This felt like a line drawn in expensive sand. The phone rang at 9:15 that evening, Evan's name lighting up my screen. Did you get Mom's invitation?" His voice carried that casual tone he used when he wanted to downplay something significant. "I did." I kept my voice neutral, waiting to see how he'd handle this. "Great. She's really excited about it. The whole family will be there, aunts, uncles, some family friends. It'll be nice for everyone to finally meet you properly." Finally meet me properly, as if the 3 previous family gatherings I'd attended had been some kind of trial run, practice sessions for the real introduction. "Evan," I said carefully, "my name isn't on the invitation." A pause, too long. "What do you mean?" "I mean the invitation says it's celebrating your engagement. Just yours. Like I'm not actually part of it." "Oh, that's just... You know how Mom is with formal stuff. She probably thought it was implied. You're overthinking this. Sam." Sam. He only called me Sam when he was trying to manage me, to make me smaller and more manageable than Samantha. I'd noticed that pattern months ago, but had chosen to ignore it. Tonight, it felt like another piece of evidence in a case I was just beginning to build. I asked. "Come on. This is supposed to be a celebration. Don't let Mom's etiquette obsession turn it into something it's not." But that was exactly what it was, something else entirely. As I hung up the phone and looked again at that beautiful, pointed invitation, I felt the first cold whisper of what was coming. This wasn't going to be a celebration of our love or our future together. This was going to be something else entirely. Something that had been planned long before I'd ever been consulted. I just didn't know yet how right I was. The Prescott estate rose from the Sonoma Valley hills like something out of a wine country magazine, all stone and glass and perfectly manicured terraces that caught the golden hour light. I pulled my rental car up the circular driveway at exactly 7:25, the gravel crunching under my tires with the kind of sound that whispered old money and established power. Evan met me at the front door, looking nervous in a way I'd never seen before. His usual confident smile seemed forced, and he kept adjusting his tie a tell I'd learned to recognize during our 1.5 years together. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek, but his eyes darted toward the house, toward whatever was waiting inside. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a navy silk dress that spoke of sophistication without trying too hard, pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's, low heels that wouldn't make me tower over Margot's petite frame. I'd learned to dress defensively around his family, to give them no ammunition for their subtle criticisms. The foyer was exactly what I'd expected. Marble floors that probably cost more than my annual rent. A crystal chandelier that threw rainbow fragments across cream-colored walls. Fresh white orchids arranged in vases that looked like museum pieces. Everything designed to make visitors feel small and slightly out of place. Samantha. Margot appeared as if summoned, gliding across the marble in a champagne-colored gown that probably had a designer label I couldn't pronounce. How lovely that you could join us. Join us. Not wonderful to celebrate with us, or so glad you're here for this special occasion. Join us, like I was a guest at someone else's party. The living room was filled with the kind of people who belonged in spaces like this: older couples discussing wine futures and political connections. Younger relatives who'd clearly never worked a day they hadn't wanted to work. I recognized a few faces from previous gatherings, but most were strangers who looked at me with polite curiosity, as if trying to figure out exactly where I fit in the Prescott family ecosystem. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Samantha," Margot announced, her voice carrying that practiced hostess cadence. "She's the interior designer Evan's been seeing." Interior designer. Not architect, not his fiancé, not the woman he'd proposed to 3 months ago on a beach in Carmel when he'd gotten down on one knee and promised me forever. The conversations flowed around me like water around a stone. Wine auction results from Napa, a cousin's new position at a tech startup that was absolutely revolutionary, someone's recent acquisition of property in Martha's Vineyard. I contributed when I could. But mostly I listened to the easy rhythm of people who'd never had to worry about mortgage payments or health insurance deductibles. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 20, though tonight there were only 12 of us arranged around a mahogany table that gleamed under another crystal chandelier. I found myself seated between Evan's Aunt Patricia and a family friend whose name I'd already forgotten, while Evan sat across from me next to his mother. The conversation during the meal followed predictable patterns: family updates, business discussions, gentle probing about my background disguised as polite interest. I answered questions about my work, my family, my plans, feeling increasingly like I was in some kind of interview I hadn't known I was taking. It wasn't until dessert arrived, individual chocolate soufflés that probably required 3 hours of preparation, that Margot made her move. "Samantha, dear," she said, her voice carrying across the table with the kind of authority that made everyone else fall silent. "Evan and I have been discussing some practical matters regarding your engagement." She reached beneath her chair and produced a sleek black envelope, the kind lawyers used for important documents. She placed it on the table in front of me with the ceremonial gravity of someone presenting evidence in court. "Given the complexity of our family's business interests and estate planning, we thought it would be wise to have certain protections in place. Just standard procedure. You understand?" I stared at the envelope, my heart beginning to pound. Around the table, conversations had stopped entirely. Even the soft clink of silverware against china had ceased. This was theater, I realized. This moment had been choreographed, planned down to the timing and the audience. What kind of protections, I asked, though I already knew. A prenuptial agreement, Margot said smoothly. Nothing personal, of course. Simply a way to ensure that family assets remain within the family, regardless of what the future might hold. She slid the envelope closer to me. Our attorney has outlined very reasonable terms. You'll find everything quite fair and straightforward. I looked across the table at Evan, waiting for him to say something, to defend me, to acknowledge that this ambush was wrong on every level, but he was staring at his dessert plate, his jaw tight, his silence filling the room like poison gas. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope and scanned the documents inside. The language was dense and legal, but the intent was crystal clear. In the event of divorce, I would receive nothing from Prescott assets, nothing from future earnings, nothing from inheritance. Even if we had children, my claim to any financial support was severely limited. I was being asked to sign away any potential future, to agree that I would enter this marriage and leave it exactly as I'd arrived, with nothing but what I'd brought myself. This is... I started, then stopped. Around the table, 11 pairs of eyes watched me with varying degrees of curiosity, embarrassment, and anticipation. Quite standard. Margot finished for me. I'm sure you understand the necessity. The Prescott name carries certain responsibilities and vulnerabilities. We simply can't afford to be careless. Careless, as if loving her son was a reckless act that required legal containment. I closed the document and looked directly at her. And if I don't sign? The question hung in the air like smoke. Margot's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. Well, she said softly, I suppose that would tell us everything we need to know about your intentions. Wouldn't it? I stood up from that mahogany table with the kind of deliberate calm that comes from pure fury. The prenuptial agreement lay open beside my untouched souffle, its pages catching the chandelier light like an accusation. Yeah, you know what tells me everything I need to know, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. The fact that you had this drawn up months ago, before you even knew who I was. The fact that you turned what should have been a celebration into a corporate negotiation. And the fact that my own fiancé is sitting there like a coward, letting his mother do his dirty work. Evan's head snapped up. Sam, please! Don't! I held up my hand, cutting him off. Don't you dare try to manage me right now. I picked up the contract and placed it carefully back in its black envelope. Around the table, the audience sat frozen, some looking embarrassed, others fascinated by the drama unfolding in their pristine dining room. Mrs. Prescott, I said, turning to face Margot directly. I understand you think you're protecting your family's assets, but what you've actually done is show me exactly how little you think of your son's judgment and how little you value his happiness. Margot's composed mask slipped just slightly. I'm simply being practical. No, I interrupted. You're being cruel, and you're being stupid, because if you knew anything about me, anything at all, you'd know that I've never needed your money, and I sure as hell don't need your approval. I set the envelope down on the table with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the silence. Evan, if you want to have an adult conversation about our future, you know where to find me, but it'll be between you and me, not you and your mother and a room full of witnesses. I walked out of that dining room with my head high and my heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. Behind me, I heard the murmur of shocked voices and Evan calling my name, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. If I paused for even a moment, I might crumble, and I refused to give them that satisfaction. The night air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside. It was barely 8:45, and the valley stretched out below the estate in rolling shadows. I fumbled for my car keys with shaking hands, the adrenaline that had carried me through my exit now making my fingers clumsy and unsteady. The drive back to my hotel was a blur of dark highways and scattered thoughts. Rain started falling somewhere around Petaluma, fat drops that turned into a steady downpour by the time I reached the parking lot. I sat in my rental car for 10 minutes, engine off, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and waiting for my phone to ring. It didn't. Back in my hotel room, I stripped off my carefully chosen dress and hung it in the closet like evidence of a crime. I stood under the shower until the water ran cold, trying to wash away the humiliation and rage that clung to my skin like perfume. When I finally emerged, wrapped in the hotel's generic white robe, I found myself staring at my phone. No missed calls, no text messages, nothing from Evan, nothing from anyone. The silence felt louder than any argument we'd ever had. I made coffee with the little machine on the dresser and sat cross-legged on the bed, my laptop open in front of me. If Evan wasn't going to call, then I had time to think, time to really examine what had happened tonight and what it meant. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision by an overprotective mother. The prenuptial agreement was too detailed, too comprehensive. Someone had spent serious time and money preparing it, which meant this ambush had been planned for weeks, maybe months. I opened my email and began scrolling back through messages from Margot. Wedding planning correspondence that I'd dismissed as typical mother-of-the-groom involvement now looked different in this new light. Her suggestions about venues, her insistence on particular vendors, her casual comments about managing the guest list appropriately. It all read like someone orchestrating a brand event rather than celebrating a marriage. There was the email about photographers, where she'd mentioned wanting someone who specialized in family legacy documentation. The message about catering, where she'd emphasized the importance of maintaining the Prescott standard. Even her suggestions about my wedding dress had been framed around what would photograph well for the family archives. I'd been so focused on being accommodating, on trying to build a relationship with Evan's family, that I'd missed the bigger picture. To them, I wasn't a daughter-in-law. I was a marketing opportunity. At 11:30, I finally gave up waiting and called Evan myself. "Sam," he answered on the first ring, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Thank God, I've been trying to figure out what to say." "How about starting with an apology?" A long pause. "I'm sorry about how that went down. Mom can be intense about family business." "Intense?" I laughed, and it came out bitter. "Evan, your mother ambushed me at a dinner party with a contract designed to strip me of any rights to a life we build together. That's not intense. That's insulting." "The prenup isn't personal." Everything about tonight was personal. The timing, the audience, the complete lack of warning. You sat there and let your mother humiliate me in front of your entire family. "I didn't know she was going to do it like that." "But you knew she was going to do it." Another pause, longer this time. "The prenup is standard procedure. Sam, every family at our level does this. It's just business." "Business." I repeated the word slowly, letting it sink in. "Is that what I am to you, a business transaction?" "Of course not, but you have to understand the position we're in. The winery, the properties, the trust funds, it's not just money. It's generations of family legacy." I closed my laptop and stared out the hotel window at the rain-soaked parking lot. "And where exactly do I fit into that legacy? Evan, what's my role in this family business of yours?" The silence stretched between us until I had my answer. I called Natalie Grant at 7:15 the next morning, knowing she'd already be at her desk in Chicago. Corporate law runs on East Coast time, and Natalie had been grinding through 18-hour days since we'd graduated law school together 12 years ago. She'd chosen contracts and mergers while I'd gone into architecture, but we'd stayed close enough that I knew she'd answer her phone for me even during billing hours. "Please tell me you're calling because you need a maid of honor dress," she said without preamble. "Because if this is about your future mother-in-law again, I'm billing you my hourly rate." "I need a lawyer, not a friend." The joking tone disappeared from her voice immediately. "What happened?" I told her everything: the nameless invitation, the dinner ambush, the prenuptial agreement presented like a loyalty test in front of an audience. When I finished, the silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Sam," Natalie finally said, her voice carrying the careful neutrality she used with difficult clients. "I need you to scan that prenup and send it to me. Every page. Don't leave anything out." "I don't have it. I left it on their dining room table like a mic drop." "Shit. Okay. Do you remember any specific language? Anything that stood out?" I closed my eyes and tried to recall the dense legal text I'd scanned in those terrible moments at the Prescott table. Complete waiver of spousal support. No claim to premarital assets or postmarital earnings derived from family business interests. Even if we had kids, my access to any support was severely limited. "That's aggressive," Natalie said carefully. "Even for high-net-worth families, most prenups have some provision for spousal maintenance, especially in long-term marriages or when children are involved. It gets worse. There was something about image rights and public representation of the family brand, like they wanted to control how I could talk about them even after a divorce." "Jesus, Sam, this sounds less like asset protection and more like—" She paused, and I could almost hear her lawyer brain working through the implications. "More like what? Give me 48 hours. I want to do some research before I start throwing around accusations. But in the meantime, do not sign anything. Do not agree to any modifications or negotiations. And definitely do not let them pressure you into thinking this is normal." "Is it normal?" "Hell no. I've seen plenty of prenups in my career, and this sounds like something designed to make you walk away rather than something designed to protect family assets." After hanging up with Natalie, I spent the morning walking around Sonoma, trying to clear my head and process what was happening to my life. The town was picture-perfect in that California wine country way, boutique shops and tasting rooms and cafes full of tourists spending more on lunch than most people made in a day. It was beautiful and charming and completely foreign to the world I'd grown up in. My phone buzzed with a text from Evan at 11:30. "Can we talk? Mom wants to explain the situation better." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Your mom and I have nothing to discuss. If you want to talk, we talk alone." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before his response came, "She means well. The family has been burned before." That last line hit me like a physical blow. The family has been burned before. Like I was some kind of threat to be contained. Some gold-digging schemer who needed to be managed and controlled. I called Natalie back. "I need you to research something else," I said when she answered. "I want to know everything you can find about the Prescott family's legal history. Divorces, lawsuits, any kind of public records that might explain why they're so paranoid about protection. That's going to take some time and probably cost you—" "I don't care what it costs. Something doesn't feel right about this whole situation. It's too orchestrated, too prepared, like they've done this before." Natalie was quiet for a moment. "What aren't you telling me?" "I don't know yet, but I have a feeling I'm not the first woman they've put through this particular gauntlet." When Natalie called me back at 4:20 that afternoon, her voice was tight with controlled anger. "Sam, you need to sit down for this." I was already sitting in my hotel room, laptop open to a dozen tabs of Prescott Winery press coverage, but I braced myself anyway. "I found something," she continued. "Actually, I found several somethings. First, there's no record of any previous marriage or divorce for Evan Prescott. So whatever they got burned by, it wasn't a bad divorce." "Okay. But here's where it gets interesting. 3 years ago, the Prescott Winery faced a major labor relations scandal. Allegations of wage theft, unsafe working conditions, discrimination against immigrant workers. It was all over the California agriculture industry publications." My stomach started sinking. "The story never made it to mainstream media because it got buried under a PR campaign that emphasized the family's charitable work and community involvement. Lots of photos of them at fundraisers, supporting local causes, being pillars of the community." "What does that have to do with—" "Sam." I pulled the PR agency's strategy documents. They're public record because of a completely unrelated lawsuit. The campaign was specifically designed to rehabilitate the Prescott family image by associating them with authentic, hardworking American values. My hands were shaking now. Natalie, please just tell me. One of the recommended strategies was a high-profile engagement to someone from a middle-class background, someone with professional credentials but working-class roots, someone who could soften their image and make them look more relatable to their customer base. The words hit me like ice water. I stared at my laptop screen, where a photo of Evan and me from a charity gala 6 months ago smiled back at me. We looked happy. We looked real. But now I was seeing it through different eyes, seeing how perfectly I fit their demographic requirements. "There's more," Natalie said quietly. "The prenup you described, I found template language that's almost identical in a document drafted by their legal team 18 months ago. It was labeled Image Partnership Candidate, Tier 2. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Sam, I think you were recruited." I flew back to Denver the next morning in a haze of rage and humiliation that made everything feel surreal. The flight attendant's smile, the businessman in the seat next to me tapping on his laptop, the view of the Rocky Mountains emerging through the clouds, it all felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold while I floated somewhere above it, disconnected and numb. My apartment felt different when I walked through the door. The same furniture, the same view of downtown Denver, the same carefully curated space I'd spent years creating. But now it felt like a stage set, like evidence in a case file labeled Image Partnership Candidate, Tier 2. Had Evan ever really seen this place as my home, or had he been cataloging it as proof of my appropriate middle-class authenticity? I dropped my suitcase by the door and stared at the engagement ring on my finger, a tasteful solitaire that Evan had presented with a speech about wanting something classic and timeless, like our love. Now I wondered if he'd chosen it from a PR consultant's playbook, nothing too flashy that might alienate working-class customers, but expensive enough to signal the family's success. The package arrived at 2:30 that afternoon. I heard the delivery truck rumbling up my street and looked out to see a FedEx driver struggling with a box that looked far too large and heavy for standard shipping. When I opened the door, he was sweating despite the cool October air. "Samantha Kerrigan." "That's me." "So, this one's been sitting at our depot for 3 weeks," he said, hefting the box onto my doorstep. "Sender paid for delivery to be held until today specifically. Must be some kind of surprise." I looked at the return address and felt my knees go weak. Gerald Kerrigan, my father's name, in his careful handwriting, but my father had died 4 months ago. My hands shook as I signed for the package and carried it inside. The box was heavier than it looked, and something rattled inside when I set it down on my kitchen table. There was a smaller envelope taped to the top, my name written across it in my father's familiar script. Inside the envelope was a letter dated 6 months before his death, along with a set of keys I didn't recognize. "My dearest Samantha," it began, and I could hear his voice in every word. "If you're reading this, it means 2 things I'm gone, and something has happened that made my lawyer decide you need to know the truth about what I've left you." I sat down hard in my kitchen chair, the letter trembling in my hands. "I know you think your old man was just a simple furniture maker who got lucky with a few custom pieces for wealthy clients. I let you think that because I wanted you to build your own life, your own success, without feeling like you owed anything to mine. But the truth is more complicated. My father had started his furniture business 40 years ago with nothing but a garage workshop and a talent for seeing the potential in discarded wood. What I hadn't known was that his custom pieces had become something much larger. His designs had been patented. His techniques had been licensed to major furniture manufacturers. His small boutique company had quietly become the intellectual property foundation for a supply chain that reached from North Carolina to Sweden. "I never told you about the patents because I didn't want money to change who you were becoming." The letter continued. "I watched you work your way through college, build your career from nothing, earn every success through your own talent and determination. I was so proud that I couldn't bear to make any of it easier for you. But now, according to the legal documents in the box, it was all mine. 40 years of patents and trademarks, licensing agreements worth millions in annual royalties, and most shocking of all, a trust account in Wyoming that had been quietly accumulating the profits from his intellectual property empire. $29 million. My father, the quiet craftsman who'd worn the same flannel shirts for 20 years and drove a pickup truck until it literally fell apart, had been worth $29 million. The money is yours now, his letter continued, but more importantly, so is the choice of what to do with it. I've watched you become a woman of integrity and strength, someone who doesn't need anyone's approval or protection. I know you'll use this gift wisely. The final paragraph made my throat tight with grief and something that felt like vindication. Remember, Samantha, respect isn't something that's given by people who think they're better than you. Respect is something you build by knowing your own worth and refusing to accept anything less than what you deserve. You are worth more than you know, in every way that matters. I set the letter down and stared at the legal documents spread across my kitchen table. Bank statements showing an account balance that made my head spin, patent certificates for furniture designs I'd seen in high-end stores without ever connecting them to my father, licensing agreements with companies whose products filled showrooms from Los Angeles to New York. My phone buzzed with another text from Evan. "Sam, please call me. We need to talk about this rationally." I looked at my phone, then at the documents that proved I had more money than the Prescott family had probably ever dreamed I might possess. Money they couldn't touch, couldn't control, couldn't take away with their insulting prenuptial agreements. For the first time since that horrible dinner, I smiled. I wasn't image partnership candidate, Tier 2. I wasn't some middle-class prop in their reputation rehabilitation campaign. I wasn't a woman who needed their protection or their approval or their family legacy. I was Gerald Kerrigan's daughter, and I was worth $29 million. The game was about to change completely. I called Natalie at 8:15 the next morning, before I'd even had coffee, before I'd fully processed what my father's inheritance meant. She answered on the second ring, her voice already sharp with caffeine and focus. "Please tell me you have good news," she said, "because I spent half the night researching prenuptial law, and I have some very creative ideas about how to destroy the Prescott's little contract." "I have better than good news. I have leverage." I told her about the package, the letter, the $29 million that had appeared in my life like a gift from beyond the grave. When I finished, the silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. "Natalie, I'm here. I'm just processing. Your father was worth $29 million, and you had no idea. None. He lived like every dollar mattered because to him, they did matter, just not in the way I thought." I picked up one of the patent certificates from my kitchen table, studying my father's signature on legal documents I'd never known existed. But here's what I'm thinking if they want to play games with prenuptial agreements. Let's play. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want you to draft a prenuptial agreement of my own, something that protects my assets and makes very clear that I'm not some vulnerable woman who needs their family's financial security." I could hear Natalie's pen scratching against paper, her lawyer brain already working. "What kind of terms are you thinking?" "Complete financial independence, protection of all premarital assets, which now includes $29 million they know nothing about, equitable division of any assets we acquire together during the marriage, and—" I paused, thinking about image partnership candidate, Tier 2, and the way they'd tried to purchase my dignity with their insulting contract. "I want penalties for any attempt to exploit my image or reputation for business purposes without my explicit consent." "That's aggressive. Are you sure you want to escalate things this way?" "Natalie, they tried to humiliate me into accepting a contract that would have made me a glorified employee in my own marriage. They researched me like I was a business acquisition. They had a strategy document that literally referred to me as a Tier 2 candidate for image partnership." My voice was getting louder, angrier. "I'm not escalating anything. I'm just refusing to be the victim in their little corporate drama." "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, I can work with this. But Sam, this is going to change everything. Once you put this kind of financial protection on the table, there's no going back. This becomes a very different kind of negotiation. Good, because I'm done being negotiated with. I want to be the one holding the cards for once. We spent the next hour going through every detail. Natalie explained the legal implications of various clauses, the ways to structure asset protection that would hold up in court, the language that would make it clear I wasn't interested in their money, but also wasn't willing to be taken advantage of. I want it ironclad, I told her. I want language that makes it clear any attempt to void this agreement results in significant financial penalties. I want them to understand that undermining me is going to be very, very expensive. What about Evan? Have you talked to him about any of this? I looked at my phone, where 17 unread messages from Evan waited. The preview text I could see started with, "Sam, I know you're upset, but," and "My family isn't trying to hurt you," and "Can we please just talk about this like adults?" Evan lost the right to a reasonable conversation when he sat there and watched his mother ambush me. If he wants to discuss our future, he can do it after his family signs my prenuptial agreement. You realize this might end the engagement entirely. Then it ends, because I'm not marrying into a family that sees me as a business acquisition. When we hung up, I spent the rest of the morning reading through my father's documents more carefully. The scope of his intellectual property empire was staggering. Patents for joinery techniques that had revolutionized furniture manufacturing, design copyrights for pieces that had influenced an entire generation of craftsmen, licensing deals with companies I recognized from furniture showrooms and home design magazines. He'd built all of this quietly, methodically, never drawing attention to the wealth it generated. The trust account showed deposits going back 15 years, royalty payments that had accumulated and grown while he continued living in the same modest house, driving the same old pickup truck, wearing clothes until they fell apart. But there was something else in the documents that made me sit up straighter. A file labeled Business Strategy Legacy Protection that contained research he'd commissioned about intellectual property law, asset protection, and wealth preservation. My father had known exactly what he was building, and he'd been very deliberate about how to protect it. At the bottom of the file was a handwritten note. "For Samantha, never let anyone make you smaller than you are. You have everything you need to build the life you want." I thought about that phrase, "never let anyone make you smaller than you are," and realized it was exactly what the Prescotts had been trying to do, not just with their prenuptial agreement, but with every subtle slight, every questioning look, every attempt to position me as the grateful outsider who should be thankful for their acceptance. My phone rang at 2:45. Evan's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time since leaving Sonoma, I answered. "Sam, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for 2 days. I've been busy. Look, I know the dinner was handled badly. Mom can be overzealous about family protection. But we can work through this. The prenup isn't set in stone. We can negotiate terms that work for both of us." "Actually, Evan, I've had my own prenuptial agreement drafted. If you want to get married, we can discuss the terms. But it'll be my contract, not your mother's." The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation was going to go. "Your contract?" "That's right. Complete asset protection, financial independence clauses, and some very specific language about image rights and business exploitation. My lawyer is sending it over this afternoon." "Sam, this is crazy. You don't have assets that need protecting." I smiled, looking at the bank statement spread across my table. "Actually, Evan, I have 29 million reasons why you're wrong about that." I drove back to the Prescott estate 3 days later, my lawyer's briefcase sitting in the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. This time, I wasn't the woman who'd fled into the rain with her dignity in tatters. This time, I was Gerald Kerrigan's daughter, worth $29 million, and I was done playing defense. The same circular driveway, the same marble foyer, the same crystal chandelier throwing rainbow fragments across cream walls, but everything felt different now. The opulence that had once intimidated me now looked like expensive theater, pretty props in a performance I was no longer interested in watching. Evan met me at the door, his face drawn with stress and something that looked like fear. Behind him, I could see Margot hovering in the hallway, perfectly composed in another designer dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. "Sam," he said, reaching for my hands. I stepped back, keeping the briefcase between us. "Is your family ready to discuss terms?" "This is insane! You're talking like we're negotiating a business merger instead of planning a wedding." I looked past him to where Margot was watching us with the intensity of a hawk studying prey. "Aren't we? Isn't that exactly what your mother turned this into?" We moved to the living room where that humiliating dinner had taken place 3 nights ago. The same mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, the same crystal chandelier overhead, but this time, I was the one placing documents on the table. I'd chosen my outfit as carefully as a general choosing armor, a cream-colored suit that spoke of serious money and serious intentions, minimal jewelry except for my grandmother's pearls, low heels that made no concessions to anyone's height insecurities. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who belonged in boardrooms making decisions that mattered. "Before we begin," I said, settling into my chair and opening the briefcase, "I want to make something very clear. I'm not here to be accepted into your family. I'm not here to prove I'm worthy of your approval. I'm here to establish the terms under which I might consider joining my life to Evan's." Margot's carefully composed expression flickered. "I'm not sure I understand the distinction." "The distinction, Mrs. Prescott, is that I'm no longer interested in being evaluated. I'm here to do the evaluating." I placed the contract on the table, 37 pages of legal language that Natalie had crafted with surgical precision. "This is my prenuptial agreement. If Evan wants to marry me, these are the terms." Evan reached for the document, but I placed my hand over it. "Before you read this, I want you both to understand something. I know about image partnership candidate, Tier 2. I know about the PR strategy to rehabilitate your family's reputation after the labor scandal. I know that my middle-class background and professional credentials made me an ideal candidate to soften your image with working-class customers." The color drained from Margot's face. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I've discovered that you researched me like a business acquisition, that you had template prenuptial language drafted 18 months ago specifically for someone like me, that this entire relationship has been managed like a corporate partnership from the beginning." I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked their perfect vineyard. "But here's what you didn't discover about me. I'm worth $29 million. The silence behind me was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "My father left me patents, trademarks, and licensing agreements that generate more annual income than your winery. So, when you tried to humiliate me with a contract designed to ensure I'd leave this marriage with nothing, you made a serious miscalculation." I turned back to face them. Evan was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Margot looked like someone had slapped her. "My prenuptial agreement protects my assets, all $29 million of them. It establishes complete financial independence for both parties. It includes equitable division of any assets we acquire together during marriage. And most importantly, it includes substantial financial penalties for any attempt to exploit my image, reputation, or personal brand for business purposes without my explicit written consent." I walked back to the table and flipped open the contract to a page I'd bookmarked. "This clause here. It specifically prohibits using our marriage or my personal story in any marketing, public relations, or image rehabilitation campaigns. Violation results in immediate payment of $5 million to a charity of my choosing." Margot found her voice first. This is completely unreasonable." "Is it? Because it seems pretty reasonable to me. It protects both parties' assets, ensures neither of us is financially vulnerable, and prevents anyone from being used as a prop in someone else's business strategy." I looked directly at her. "Unless, of course, you were counting on using me as a prop in your business strategy." Evan was flipping through the pages, his face growing paler with each clause. "Sam, this changes everything." "No, Evan, this reveals everything. Your mother's contract was designed to keep me powerless and grateful. My contract establishes us as equals. The difference between those two approaches tells you everything you need to know about how we're viewed in this family. I closed the briefcase and stood up. You have 48 hours to review the terms and decide if you want to sign. If you do, we can discuss moving forward with wedding plans. If you don't, then we both learned something important about what this relationship really was. Margot recovered enough to attempt one last power play. And if we refuse, if we decide this kind of arrangement isn't suitable for our family. I smiled, and I knew it didn't reach my eyes. Then you'll have successfully protected your family from a woman who never needed your money, never wanted your approval, and definitely doesn't need your permission to build the life she wants. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and Mrs. Prescott, the next time you want to research someone's background for a potential image partnership, you might want to dig a little deeper. You never know what you might miss. The sound of my heels clicking against marble echoed through the foyer as I left them sitting at that polished table with 37 pages of legal language that spelled out exactly how much their game had just changed. Evan called me at 11:47 that night. I was sitting in my apartment, surrounded by my father's documents, a glass of wine at my elbow and a strange sense of peace settling over me for the first time in weeks. "We'll sign it," he said without preamble. "All of it. All of it. Mom had our lawyers review it twice. They said it's comprehensive." I almost smiled at that. Comprehensive was Natalie's specialty. And I want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen the way it did. The dinner, the ambush, the way my family treated you, none of that was what I wanted. But you let it happen. A long pause. Yeah, I let it happen, and I'm sorry. I set down my wine glass and looked out at the Denver skyline, lights twinkling in office buildings where other people were working late, building their own versions of success. Evan, I need you to understand something. I'm not signing that contract because I want to marry you anymore. What do you mean? I mean, I'm signing it because I want to see what happens when your family realizes they can't control me. I want to watch them try to navigate a relationship with someone who doesn't need their approval or their money. Another pause. Longer this time. That's not exactly the romantic foundation I was hoping for. Romance was what I thought we had before I found out I was image partnership candidate, Tier 2. Now I'm curious to see if there's anything real underneath all the strategy and positioning. The contracts were signed 2 days later in a conference room at Natalie's law firm. Evan flew out to Denver with his lawyer, a thin man with nervous energy who kept adjusting his glasses as he reviewed each clause. Margot didn't come a small victory that tasted sweeter than I'd expected. But signing those papers wasn't my real revenge. That came 3 hours later, when I was alone in my apartment with my laptop and a secure internet connection. I'd spent the morning organizing document screenshots of emails from Margot about managing the guest list appropriately, strategy documents from the PR firm outlining their image rehabilitation campaign, internal memos discussing the need for authentic working-class representation in their marketing approach, everything that proved their labor scandal cover-up and their systematic approach to using people like props in their corporate theater. The whistleblower platform was surprisingly simple to use. Anonymous submission, secure servers, automatic distribution to relevant media outlets and regulatory agencies. I uploaded everything methodically, each document tagged and categorized for maximum impact. The cover message was a single sentence. Silence is the soil where arrogance grows. I'm done watering it. By the time the story broke 48 hours later, I was already back in Denver, watching the news coverage from my couch with a cup of coffee and a sense of completion I hadn't felt in months. The headlines were everything I'd hoped for. Prescott Winery used fake relationships to cover labor violations. How elite families manipulate public image through strategic partnerships. The woman who exposed wine country's biggest image scam. My phone rang constantly, reporters wanting statements. Evan calling with increasingly frantic messages. Margot's lawyer making vague threats about non-disclosure agreements that didn't exist. I ignored them all. Instead, I called Natalie. "Did you see the news?" I asked. Are you kidding? It's everywhere. The labor board is reopening their investigation. 3 other women have come forward claiming they were targeted for similar image partnerships, and the Prescott stock price dropped 12% in the first hour of trading. Good. Sam, you realize this probably means the engagement is over. I looked at the ring on my finger, that tasteful solitaire chosen for its appropriate middle-class appeal. You know what, I'm okay with that. Really? Really. Because I learned something important over the past week. I don't need anyone's approval to know my worth. I don't need anyone's acceptance to build the life I want. And I definitely don't need to make myself smaller to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. I slipped the ring off my finger and set it on the coffee table next to my father's letter. My dad was right. Respect isn't something that's given by people who think they're better than you. It's something you build by knowing your own worth and refusing to accept anything less. The Prescott estate looked different in the newspaper photos, smaller somehow, less imposing. Just another expensive house owned by people who'd confused wealth with wisdom, power with worth. As for me, I had $29 million, a successful career I'd built myself, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, when arrogant people try to play games with your life, the best revenge is simply refusing to lose. 3 months later, I used some of my inheritance to start a foundation supporting immigrant workers' rights in agricultural communities. The first grant went to an organization investigating labor violations in California wine country. I never heard from Evan again, but I did hear that Margot had to personally apologize to their workforce in a public ceremony covered by every agriculture industry publication in the state. Some lessons, it turns out, are more expensive than others. Thank you so much for listening to this story of revenge, resilience, and knowing your worth. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story from? Please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts and your location so we can connect with our amazing community from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more empowering stories, and share your own thoughts about standing up to people who try to make you feel small. Your voice matters, and I can't wait to hear from you.